Hi, Anthony. How are you doing? Welcome to the School of Waste podcast. Thank you so much for doing this. It really means a lot to me.
Hey man, my absolute pleasure, and definitely I'm excited to do this. I enjoy talking, so like I mentioned before, so it's going to be fun.
So, man, I see you grow every day. Every video you put out, there is this step-by-step progress to every day of yours musically. And is there a system you have for yourself about what to choose in terms of which song you're going to put yourself into to study or focus on, and what kind of material you're exactly focusing on? Do you think about all those things a lot before entering to study a song, or do you just let it be all gut feeling and move from there?
I think in the context of a song, it could be, let's say I'm working on a set of chord changes in a particular song that I'm trying to solo over, or just create interesting bass lines over. What I try to do is, let's say I get to it on day one and I manage to get something going with it. Day two, whatever I did in day one, I try not to go there again. So the idea is that you want to get familiar with a particular idea or concept or a lick or whatever it is, but as soon as it's familiar and comfortable, we need to try moving on at the very least, because the longer you stick around, I think that's where the ultimate trap lies, where people get stuck. You see this all the time with guys with scales and arpeggios. They're like, yeah, bro, I know my scales, I know my arpeggios, but can't go beyond that. And that's because you keep playing the same thing when you're practicing, which after a certain point is not practice anymore. Practice has to be where you put yourself in a vulnerable situation, whether it's learning a song, a groove, or bass line, or whatever it is. You have to put yourself in a very unfamiliar territory, and that's where you'll actually learn and grow. So for me to develop that mindset, it took a lot out of me as a teenager, because as a teenager your ego is off the roof because everyone tells you, hey, you need to do this. Then 18-year-old me playing Dream Theater was like, nah man, I got this, but then eventually as time went on, I'm like, yeah, I need to stop doing what I already can and try other things. But it can be along the same lines. It's a song. Is it a groove? Is it classical music? So yeah, that used to be a general mindset for me a while ago. Now it's more like, because I write and I put out content and do these kind of things, I just try to get something productive happening every day. It could be, a few bars of an idea that I write down, or maybe I watch certain videos of bass players and I'm like, man, I miss practicing the stuff that I already can play, but I kind of forgot about, So that's what 2020 has been for me. It's brought me back in the shed. I've been practicing a lot, which I enjoy a lot, just being able to practice. So, yeah.
So which aspect is it that keeps you kind of sucked into it? Basically, what I'm trying to ask is that if you can keep that chain going on of practicing, is it that you're constantly creating challenges, little challenges inside there for yourself that keeps you engaged? Because practice can be boring. People can have time and not practice, or practice the same thing again and again.
Yeah, for me, it's like I look at it from like the same perspective of training for any sport, really, because at the end of the day, I remember watching this. It was like a mini documentary on Usain Bolt, and there was so much to it, and how he is, and all that, all because the guy runs in like less than 10 seconds, And that to me was fascinating, that his result is just, it's a fraction of a minute, practically speaking, but the amount of work that goes into it is ridiculous and so detailed. And I remember watching all these runners in the past thinking, man, like these sprinters, how much of their time do they spend just trying to get that whole thing down? There's a lot of repetition involved, which I'm a big proponent of in practice. But when I say that, and then I say you should not do the same thing twice, it's usually because I tend to take certain ideas and I will constantly repeat it, for example. But then I'll find a different way to challenge myself. If it is a 16th note phrase, 4 beats, 1 bar of 4/4, I will try to subdivide it as triplets, but still play it like a 4, for example. And then now I take the exact same thing and I'll play it in 5/4, and that will clear an overlap. So do it through that, or do it in 3/4. That will create a different kind of overlap. So taking the same stuff, repeating it through varying directions, so I used to do that a lot. And also it's very hard to remember these things, which is why I always encourage most of my students, and all of them actually, to just write these ideas and thoughts out and then just come back to it. You don't have to sit and try to do this in 5 hours a day. You could do one variation of an idea for a couple of minutes for the first day, so it doesn't have to take up your whole day. I think where practicing gets boring is when you have this notion that I need to dedicate X amount of time. I have to do at least 2-3 hours. When people tell me that, I'm like, well, sure, but even 30 minutes, but a solid 30 minutes is much better than the 3 hours of whatever you do. So I think, it's important to understand that balance of pushing yourself because you need to be pushed versus pushing yourself and being unrealistic, So a lot of times you find yourself on either side. So I think it's important to evaluate that. That's why I like to write notes about my practice sessions, or how, like waking up and how I feel. How's my cup of coffee in the morning and how does my day feel? If I sit down to practice, will I get anything out of it? Because of having done this for a while, I know when I wake up a certain day, I'm like, today I'm not going to get anything done. I just know it. My body tells me like, bro, just get on Netflix, just chill, So I've learned to adapt to various situations, but for sure I'd say don't forcefully try to make time. Just dedicate a small fraction. 30 to 60 minutes is a good window, because if you learn to make that work, you'll be able to understand how to make additional hours work. But you need to start there. So the idea is not to start big and go 3-4 hours and then try to stay there, and then you'll get bored. It's going to get boring. I mean, I get bored sometimes, So I know a lot of people who are like that, who get bored with just trying to have set hours of practicing. Yeah.
But isn't there that risk where you might fall into the trap of basically not sitting at all? Because if you're just thinking, today I don't feel like doing it, tomorrow I'm not going to feel like doing it again, maybe, and day after if I visit the same feeling again, then what do you do with yourself?
Okay, yeah. So it can go the wrong way. For me, this is again one of the reasons why I like to make notes or even record my practice sessions, because while I did say, yes, today I might wake up saying, I'm not going to get anything done, I still do something or the other. I might doodle, play over some jazz standards or something like that, or just play along to some albums that I like. But for me, I don't actually find anything productive in doing that for where I'm at, For somebody else, it could possibly work differently. But what I usually do with most of my students is I give them this 1 month window. And I say, okay, 1 month, 1 hour a day without fail. Take your major scales and your 4 fundamental triads, major, minor, diminished, and augmented. Your goal is to do 2 keys a day of each. So if I do day 1, C major and F major, then I also do C major, diminished, minor, and augmented, F major, minor, diminished, augmented. Try to do this full circle without stopping. Doesn't have to be fast, but try to get through this little routine and see how long that takes you to do, So it's very subjective. For some people, it takes the entire hour. For some, 5 minutes, For some people, even less than that. It's so subjective. But this, what it does is, because you're working on a 2 key a day system, after 6 days, you will cover 12 keys. And then what I like to do is the 7th day, I use that as a review day to go through all the 6 days of material.
Right.
Now here's a trick. So if I have a 1 hour window I'm giving myself. If I took 15 minutes for C major and F major, 15 minutes is my average across the 6 days. Now on the 7th day, what can I actually do in that hour? Will I be able to do all of it? or because it's 15 minutes for every two keys, so it's going to take an hour and a half, or like, like how is it going to work? But the idea is, because you're kind of repeating the same thing on the bass, unlike the piano, playing C major and D major is the same thing as far as your hands are concerned, right? So the idea is, because of the repetition of doing a major scale and these triads across two keys a day, you're getting more and more familiar with it, which means you actually should be getting fairly quicker at it.
Right.
So when it comes for your review day, you should be able to get through it more efficiently, maybe taking up 6 minutes per key.
Right.
So, and that reduces from 15 minutes to 12 minutes. So you start to compress the amount of time it takes to get through a particular routine. So, and this is a technique I kind of adapted from running, actually. So it's like, if it takes me a set amount of time to do 2 km, let's say 10 minutes, the next day I want to try to hit 9 minutes 30. I have to, one way or the other. It might mean I might have to start a little quicker or pick up the pace somewhere in the middle. So take the same thing and apply it to practice, where like you get more familiar. The more familiar you get, you need to just kind of go through it. And then the good thing about having the review day on day 7 is that you can make notes of your problem scales.
Right.
Like for me, B major is a problem, even if I have a low B, because I'm more of a flat key kind of guy. I like flat keys. So when I think B major is like, it tends to trip me up a little bit sometimes, if I'm not focused enough. So sharp keys is where I give my attention. I feel weak there on the bass. So this way, you're giving yourself something to kind of gauge where you're at. How are you managing to absorb the ideas? It's very simple, but as simple as it is, it can really go into complex direction, because you can take this from major scale harmony, you can go into melodic minor harmony, diminished scale, harmonic minor. You can use any scale and replace it and use the same routine. And it will really allow you to just, like I said, it's like a self-help. Like, it just allows you to gauge yourself really well without anyone having to tell you, yeah, I think you should do this, which sure, you can have a teacher to do that. But at the end of the day, you would know, if you are able to stay true to yourself, you would know what you need to do. So this method helped me a lot. And then I started to take this routine approach and apply it to everything else. So jazz standards, like I used to go through a standard a day, alphabetical order. So some of the songs, I don't even know the name. I just open, just keep going. And some songs might make me sound like I sound hideous, and then I make a note. Okay, this song kicked my ass. Okay, move on. Then okay, this song really destroyed me. Okay, so I take those songs that gave me a hard time with song titles starting from A, and now I have a list of songs that I need to sit with. So I start to give them a little more time, and then again, same thing. The more I get comfortable, move on. More I get comfortable, move on. So this really, it's a good universal approach to have, regardless of the nature of the content, whether it's a simple major scale or the most complex violin sonata from Bach. So,
Right. So there is this clarity of your mindset that I hear from you now, how you've organized your head properly around all these things, where you have a system. I'm going to go through the real book. I'll go in alphabetical orders, and I'll see what's not working out. So sometimes, like, I had this issue with myself where my mind was completely foggy about how do I navigate this space? How do I focus on progress, musical progress? Did you go through that yourself at any point of time in your life where you felt like you just didn't know what to do? You wanted to put in time, but it's just this order wasn't coming in your head only. You couldn't make sense out of what's not working and what's working, where you're lacking. And if you did go through this, do you remember how you came out of it, or was it just repetition for you?
for me, one thing I'm grateful for and sometimes not grateful for is my stubbornness. So even if it's working or not, I will sit my ass down and I'll just really go through the whole thing. So many years ago when I was in music college, I entered as a guitar player. Then I started playing bass, and then very quickly I realized, okay, you know what? I know a lot of guitar players play bass, but it's really not the same thing. The touch, the sound you need to have, it's it's different. So I completely dropped the guitar and I said, okay, I'm going to dedicate my time to the bass. At the time I was 18, and this was when Michael Pipakinia came out. He was 13, I think. Yeah, 13. Saw this video of him playing in a park. I'm like, shit, how the hell does a 13-year-old kid play like that, And then somehow in my head I knew, okay, you know what? There's always two things that can never fail you in terms of practice: your scales and arpeggios. Because you take scales, arpeggios, and rhythm, that's music.
Right.
I mean, there are other elements, articulation and all that, but that's all a byproduct of being able to have these three elements down. So I would relentlessly sit and play scales for hours on end. I would just do it mechanically without any head, no thought involved. And I did that for 2 years, averaging between 10 to 12 hours at least, sometimes 16, like sometimes even more. And thing is, that was really not productive. Those 2 years were not productive in the sense of any music. But here's the funny part. After that whole drill of doing this for a couple of years, anything I picked up became so easy to divulge into. Because whatever said and done, my hands were ready for it. Just because of the constant battering repetition of scales and arpeggios that I put myself through. And by playing scales, I mean playing it on one string at a time, playing my arpeggios one string at a time, entire thing, and then doing all the strings, then doing permutations, scale permutations, and I put myself through that a lot. And when people used to hear me in college and all that, they'd be like, "Man, that doesn't even sound good." And I always had a notion: practice is not supposed to sound good. It's supposed to be you at your worst. So that really allowed me to have the headspace to maintain what I've been doing since then. So that's why I push anyone who, like, let's say a guy's been playing for 3 years and he's got a decent feel for the bass. I'd be like, okay, you know what? I want you to take the next 6 months and play nothing but scales and arpeggios, 2 hours a day. You don't have to go mental like me. Do 2 hours a day, every day, if you have the time. Get through the 6 months. On the 7th month, I want you to take whatever song you like and try to learn it. And with the exception of trying to find what the notes are, everything else is already under your fingers in terms of technique to execute it. So I think one of the biggest hindrances for anybody when it comes to trying to maintain the sanity of practice is having your technique down first. Your technique is going to define everything else that comes after, And that doesn't mean learning to shred, no. But really learning to play each and every note with clarity and nice touch, which could, for some people, it's natural. They could take 6 months or a year to develop that. That's a beginner. But that to me is paramount. That's why I always look at certain guys. I'm like, okay, your lines and your improv is funny, but you have the technique to be able to make certain materials work. So here, take this and practice this. And after a week, they start to play these lines and stuff like that. And then they start to feel how their fingers actually can execute these ideas. And then that further inspires you to keep on this path, So for me, I think that really set up the success of being able to maintain the drive to want to keep practicing. Otherwise, I don't think it's possible, because that's the problem you see now, like younger guys who want to play, Dean Town by Wolfpack, but they can't even move their fingers steadily, nice and slow, like a straight eights rock kind of groove, Or like some guys, I even say like, hey, you want to play the Wolfpack? Cool. Can you try playing, the bass line to Sweet Child of Mine on the verse, which is just doing. Like, can you get it there? Just play it solid, play it well, and they can't, because the technique is like really wobbly and questionable. So, I think the more confident you are, and the stronger you are in the technical side of execution, the more you will feel like taking on more things to practice.
That's true.
And you particularly see this with drummers, and drums is my first instrument, so I always turn to that. And when I look at certain drummers, like one of my favorites is Vinny Colaiuta, and there was this one book I was working on called Sticking Patterns. And when I went through one exercise in the book, I'm like, wow, you know what? I've heard these phrases in a lot of Vinny solos. But here's the thing: he had all those exercises down when he was like 14 or 15 or something like that, and he had it down to a point where he can just take one exercise, which is 16 bars. He can play that thing for hours, and you won't even know it, just because of how much he has command over each and every part of it. Why? Because the technique is there to execute everything. So I think that mentality translates well on any instrument. So I think if I was to simplify it, I would say technical security, confidence, that allows you to maintain your momentum and drive to want to practice things, because you know it might be hard in the beginning, but at some point you will be able to do it if you keep at it. Yeah.
Do you personally prefer doing things by ear, or do you prefer that you find a book, you find, let's say, like you just gave an example of Vinny Colaiuta, his book, and you studied it, then you went into it deeply. What do you prefer between the both? That would you prefer hearing a record, learning it from there, or would you prefer the book, or would you prefer a little bit of both?
A bit of both, but definitely more of the ear. With, like, when it comes to bass, I've never used a book at all. There was one guitar book that I purchased years ago by Mick Goodrick, the advancing guitarist. I bought it. I had never finished the book, but there are some beautiful concepts on there that I took and I translated on the bass. In the case of the Vinny Colaiuta thing, because with drums it's a little elusive. You could hear something, you don't know if it's a double stroke or a single stroke, and then when you play singles, it doesn't sound right. Then you play doubles, it doesn't sound right. So it's like, okay, like, you know, I need some reference, some map to understand what is this sorcery, you know. But anywhere where there's harmony and melody involved, I will prioritize using my ears, because it's easier to pick out. Rhythm on the drum set particularly can be elusive and tricky to keep track of. But yeah, having said that, some books are great, some are good, some are strange, because when I see books that are like super thick and it's a harmony book, my immediate thought is these are usually Western harmony books, right?
Right.
So this stack of sheets is all talking about the same 12 notes that you and I know. So it's like, would you rather have a book of systems where you teach people to fish, or would you rather give them fish for 6 months? You know, like I'd rather in the form of a book give you an insight and idea into the thought process, give you a few examples, possibly with audio or something, and then you take it from there. That's why I like the advancing guitarist from Mick Goodrick. He would talk about the concept, and there'll be like a bunch of empty sheet music for you to write on, like based on whatever concept you went through. So I liked that book, but then the more I dug into it, I realized there's not many books like that. There are very few books like this. I mean, some books and systems I'm a big fan of is from Jeff Berlin, where it's very academically sound. It really sets you on the right path. Like I mentioned before, it builds your technique, it enables you, and it's rooted in harmony and melody. But generally, ear is where I'd go. If it's classical music, I'll go to sheets, because I don't even bother trying to use my ear to transcribe, because there's a plethora of books and sheets. So I don't want to sit and waste time trying to transcribe it. I just read it and then just play it, you know. But again, I treat classical music like a workout. That's how I treat it, because some of them, it is literally a workout. So yeah, definitely I think a balance is a good way to go, you know. It's funny you bring this up, because I was just talking to one of my students a couple of days ago about how reading music, you don't have to be the greatest, most killing sight reading guy, but reading music really is such a big advantage, because your ability to retain material, your ability to just jot down ideas, and really it helped me a lot with maintaining my momentum, you know. Like for instance, I used to always hear these very nice rhythmically placed pentatonic lines, you know, from Jaco or Michael Brecker or Paddy Tucci. I transcribed some of them, but then after a certain point, my ears started to hear things that were not there. So I was just like, you know what? I just took a sheet. I was like, okay, I'm going to write pentatonic scale melodies, and I'll just write them however the hell I want to using these 5 notes. So I would permutate them and all that, but I will only do them as triplets. So I had one sheet, pentatonic scales, triplets written out. Then I tried playing it. And some of the lines were really stupid because it's like a low A and then a high E, which is impractical. But again, it's practice, right? You don't have to play the way you practice live. So it enabled me to keep track of, oh, cool, this phrase, this, what I wrote here, just out of my head, not even trying to think musically. I like this. So it allowed me to pick certain ideas that I like. Then I take that and I sit with it a little longer. So for sure, the balance is crucial, but I would encourage anybody, because reading is not, it's not too difficult. It is a little weird in the beginning, but once you get the hang of it, you don't have to be so great at it for practice purposes at home. But it just, like I said, it helps retain, because there's only so much your mind can keep,
Yeah.
in terms of memorizing and remembering. So that's why, like, sometimes when I teach as well, it's like I get a question and I'm like, I'm struggling to remember, and then I have a whole bunch of sheets here, my old notes from practice. I just pull out and I just quickly go through, and I'm like, yeah, this is the answer. So yeah, I think if you're starting out, go with the ear, and after a certain point, try to find a book. It could be anything. There are many great books. For bass, I don't think there's too many, in my opinion at least, good books. Guitar, there's plenty, and you can take guitar books and kind of make it work for bass to certain degrees. So I would definitely encourage that. And yeah, you don't have to go through like 20 books. You can even take 1 or 2 books, but really go through every page well, and then take it from there. Yeah.
Do you think reading or writing music was just a way of recording what's in your head earlier? And now that we have the facility available to record right away and listen back right away, can a musician survive completely in the live scenario or musical scenario without doing any of reading, any reading at all?
Absolutely. I mean, there are some monster players who don't read at all. However, your scope of working is limited in that situation. So plus, like, based on my own experience, this is a really funny incident when in 2019, when I was called to play last minute for the brand new heavies, they were specifically asking for a bass player who can read. So I got the call. Funny enough, I went there was no sheet music. There were no charts. So then it made me realize, okay, somebody who can read generally would have an understanding of harmony, understanding of melody, and based on the recommendations they got, they all came across me. They saw my videos, and a lot of my videos I'm just shredding, because I'm not out there trying to tell people, yeah man, you got to groove first and then you got to solo first. No, I just put what I want to.
Right.
If I can't groove, I'll not play the bass. That's what I tell people. So these guys, they saw some videos of me shredding, and they're like, yeah, let's call this guy. So when I got there, I saw there were no sheets. Then I asked the guy, I was like, why would you look for somebody who can read when you don't have sheets? He's like, no, because that way it eliminates anybody who will waste our time. Because imagine if they got somebody who can play, but he doesn't understand harmony. Okay. And we had to do 13 songs, and we only had a 1-hour sound check, no rehearsals. And I had 1 hour before sound check to listen to the songs. So the way I heard the music, immediately I structurized it like how a chart would structurize it. And I latched onto the melody. So I didn't even memorize the chords or anything. I just latched onto the melody, and some of the bass lines are written bass lines. So the melody guided the whole show for me. But that's only because of a mental mapping ability, because of reading and writing. My teacher used to force me when I was in college to write. He said, hey, you want to work on reading? Write. So that enabled me in that particular situation, at a last minute situation, to fill in a gig for a really iconic band. And I had a great time. I mean, of course, it wasn't my most perfect show, but I enjoyed it a ton. And most people they didn't even figure out that I was a fill-in bass player, So many instances in my career so far, I've found reading has helped me a lot, and especially from a last minute point of view, or a situation where there's a lot of rehearsals, or you're playing with an orchestra and all that. Like I've seen some guys take orchestra gigs and they can't read. I'm like, why would you do that? As a guitar player, you have a part in bar 24, and then the symphony goes on, and then bar 120, you got another part. Now, if you don't understand the nature of charts, you are really going to screw it up. And that is even more difficult than playing an entire piece where you are playing in broken fragments. And I've seen this happen. So, again, it's very subjective. Are you a bass player who's looking to be like a Nathan East, who has got his foot in various genres and styles and kinds of players? Or do you want to just be like a Hadrian Furrow doing your thing, which is also great. I completely respect and admire that. But you can't be Nathan without being able to read. That's a fact. Because a lot of those gigs, people think, oh, these pop shows, at least the old school pop shows, they must rehearse 5 days before the show. No. Like if you have all those days to rehearse, that's a luxury actually.
Yeah.
Everything is so tight these days. So the best way to handle it, especially if your band has more than 5-6 guys, have sheets. The sheets will really keep everybody together. So no matter what goes wrong, at least you know where it went wrong and how to fix it. And any changes you want to make, you can make it. So it's really a strong asset, in my opinion. But again, like I said, if you don't want to bother with it and you want to do your own thing, sure, But if you don't get calls for gigs, if you don't get calls for studio sessions, I mean, it is what it is, because a lot of studio sessions I've done, I mean, I practically don't have time to listen to the scratch chart. So I go in and read straight. And I've recorded albums like that in the past. Just go, read 2 hours, 9 songs or whatever, just read and then get out, But that's what keeps me getting the calls. So you really have to choose sides here, because there's no way you can be equally spread, Like I don't want to read, but yeah, why doesn't David Foster call me, David Foster and friends. Man, those gigs, like, you don't read, thank you, next, so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's due on my part in terms of reading. I'm not a sight reader, but I figure my way around the chart. But it's not that somebody puts it in front of my eyes and I go for it. It's something that I have to cover. But what has helped me is that because whatever amount of reading I do, I can read rhythms. And in a chord chart situation, if I'm doing like a TV thing or where we have a lot of arrangements, a lot of hits, so at least I write the hits on the top of the chords. So that really does the job. So I've seen you play a lot of very, very long solos on your YouTube channel. Are you writing all those solos down when you're transcribing them, or do you just memorize them?
You mean like the transcription solos?
Yeah, the transcriptions.
So the transcription solos, when I recorded them, I memorized them.
Okay.
I've transcribed a whole bunch, not the whole bunch, maybe 8 or 9, but I've only written on paper like maybe 3 solos actually. Giant Steps I definitely wrote, because that is 11 choruses long, 2.5 minutes.
How long did you take
by on the recording?
Go through that whole thing?
So it took me a total of roughly 1 hour per chorus to write it down. And maybe another 10-15 minutes to get it under the fingers. But I didn't this is the other thing that I always tell people. When transcribing, do it in installments, because if you sit at it, it's just like mixing. You sit, your ears will fatigue and you'll start hearing things that's not there. So I transcribed a chorus a day across 11 days. And each chorus, as I transcribed and wrote it, I played it. So on the 12th day, it was just a matter of me just sitting and trying to play all the choruses back to back. So that solo, actually, it's funny because when I tell people, it took a total of 11 hours to get everything together. And maybe I spent another 12 hours trying to play it. And then after that, it was just trying to play it fast. That's like a day's work, right? A lot of people thought it must have taken me weeks, if not less. But then that's what I told them. There's a lot of arpeggios in there. There's a lot of scale movements in there. And because of having practiced it like a nut in the past, When I sat down with this, the speed element it just came out. And that too, playing on a jazz bass neck, it's not easy, but I never looked at it as, oh, this bass is not built for that. I can't, it'll be difficult. No. So something like Giant Steps took me that much time. Then I did a Jeff Berlin transcription around the similar amount of time. But yeah, those solos, the transcription solos that I played on my channel, all memorized. Funny enough though, I forgotten a lot of Giant Steps, a lot of the Jeff Berlin solo, but I still remember the Jaco solos. Those I can never seem to forget. I don't know why. And then I think I realized why, because they are beautiful. I love those solos so much. The one on Havana, the one on Port of Entry. Those are the two ones that I transcribed from Jaco. And I can still play them. Maybe not clean, but I haven't forgotten them. So that's why I tell people you need to transcribe material that you connected, vibe with, on an emotional level. You don't have to do it like a chore, saying, oh, this guy said I need to transcribe Charlie Parker. No, do you like Charlie Parker? You don't transcribe. There's nothing wrong in not digging something because that is the norm, So yeah, those solos were memorized. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just been a huge game changer for me personally. I, in the middle, was really feeling burnt out trying to learn stuff and, doing things I'm supposed to do. And the same thing, that I didn't love those things that I was working on. So it was just taking and eating all the time that I had in the day. And when I would finish those things, like if I'm trying to learn a solo that I'm supposed to learn, and there's no joy used to come out of it. No, never felt happy, forgot it in a day or two, just not feeling right about it. Versus, finding things I relate to at the moment, because life anyways moves in phases, right? So right now I'm really connecting with the gospel style of bass playing. So it's just next level of satisfaction. Talking about playing fast, and there's this whole thing that used to happen on your channel when you had this choir, where everybody used to keep saying stuff about your bass, that why aren't you using a proper bass, a so-called proper bass.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about gear altogether? Because I don't know if you particularly are a believer in that you need the best gear, or you can do wonders with your fingers and the amount you invest into the gear you already have. What is your take on that?
Okay. So, in my experience, what I realized is that a lot of musicians, particularly bass players, they allow the gear to define their actual ability to make music. In a certain situation, scenario, yes, I get it. It's like you are playing a stadium gig and you have a 112 amp. That's not going to work. You need a nice 810 or something. Yes, fair play, and a good 810, not just a cheap brand. You need a nice Ampeg or something like that, or Aguilar or something. But where I start to draw the line is on a more personal front. So before the Squire, I had a John Myung D fretted bass, so a fretless 6-string. And then I had a Sadowski 5-string, a jazz bass, like a Metroline, I think. Good basses. But man, my sound was miserable. And I knew it all along. Because I was still making that transition from guitar to bass, right? So on the guitar, you get sustained from being quite mellow into the strings. On the bass, you have to be a little more firm. You got to hold on a bit more. I was not getting that. And then I remember playing this guy's Squire in college. I was just like, hey, can I try it? Because I like the sound, Then I started playing it. Then it kind of hit me. I had this light bulb moment. I'm like, wow, why does this feel right? So two things, because it's 4 strings, one. And because one thing about cheap gear exposes you very quickly. That's why a lot of people don't like it. Okay, and by that, I mean every piece of cheap gear. For some guys in the studio, this interface is cheap. And if you don't know how to set up a recording chain, a signal chain, or how to get a good sound, man, it'll show. People would even think you're using something cheaper than this just because of your inability. So, and again, this brings me back to this one Vinny Colletti video I was watching. He went to some random place. He was in a jam session playing a really miserable drum kit. But man, he sounded like Vinny right from beat one. Cymbals were like yuck, but he had a way to make it work. Now, you look at that, and then you look at everybody else on the other side of things, especially musicians who are not gigging a lot. They go down this gear talk, and it's like a big rabbit hole, a black hole. So I think primarily because cheap gear exposes everything wrong with your technique, your sound, your voice, or whatever it is. Because I've seen singers come in with $4,000, $5,000 mics, but man, if your tone has no lows, your tone has no lows. Accept it. Just move on. No mic is going to bring that out. Sure, some might have characteristics, but that doesn't mean it's going to make up for your actual vocal cords, right? I've heard some tenor saxophone recordings with great mics, but man, it sounds like a soprano down an octave. It doesn't have that growl. So it's like it made me question a lot of things about gear. So when I started playing the Squire, I just connected with it. It felt right, and it always puts up a fight. Cheap gear puts up a fight with you, and by that I mean it doesn't allow you to just. Because I've played some Foderas, man. When I play a Fodera, I feel like a cheetah unhinged. I can play even faster than I can, which I don't like actually, because now I don't have to put effort into having to play something fast. I might make it look effortless, but playing on the Squire fast stuff, it makes you sweat actually. And I like that. Because everything I play, I have to be sincere about it. I can't just forever shred, because at the end of the day, I'll cramp up. So, cheap gear, I think you really have to find that sweet spot, So, when I was playing the Squire all these years, I really dug it. And everything I recorded on prior to my upcoming album, everything was a Squire on some other people's albums and EPs and stuff. And I always got a good sound out of it. And I always kept things simple. Just a nice DI, record, nothing more. So, a lot of people ask, hey, did you change the pickups? No, I don't even know what the pickup brand is. I changed the bridge. That made a big difference for sure. But then I put this theory to the test. So in 2018, I went to Bali. And Bali is where they make a lot of the Squires, especially the guitars. So I walked into the store. I wanted to pick up a guitar. But I didn't walk in with the bias, because people think, you're going to pick up a Squire. I'm like, we'll see. I tried a whole bunch of Fenders, Telecasters, nice. Then I saw this Tele Squire. Man, it's like I picked it up, played it. Again, it's that small element I told you. It resists you because they are well built, but for some strange reason, maybe it's the wood or I don't know what, maybe it's the guy who did the finishing touches on it, it just resists you. It doesn't allow you to just play without thinking. And then I saw the price. I paid $180 for this. And I recorded on the first album and my second album, and I got a great guitar sound out of it, and I still haven't changed the strings. And we're in 2021. In June, it'll be 3 years since I bought this, and I don't even know what strings it came with. Wow. Now, this is not because I'm a cheapo, but it works. It works. It sounds good. So why do I have to go into my head and say, no, bro, pick up an actual Telecaster, pick up good strings also. If it works, it works, In fact, recently, I was posting snippets of my album, and then somebody asked me, hey, what are you using for your guitar sound? I like it. I put up a story. I was astonished with the way people are responding to me. A lot of them are like, bro, I'll give you my code for plugins, bro. Please use something better, To which I responded. I was like, hey, do you like what sound I have? Yeah, it sounds great. So I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Because you see that it is just a low tier amp simulator, and in your mind no, the Corey Wong signature thing or this, like, why? It works, So it made me question so many things. So even now I've upgraded a whole bunch of things in the studio and stuff like that, but nothing overboard yet. Would I like to have an Apollo X8 from Universal Audio? Sure, those are great interfaces, great preamps and stuff. But if that is my mindset, I need that to make good music or record good music, you're done. You're just
Yeah.
done. If you don't know how to make use of anything else, you're done. My first album, I just used a hand recorder, Zoom H5, because it has a USB interface port to it. Sure, it had some noise and buzzes and stuff, but man, like, you need to learn to work that first before you climb up the ladder. Some people get to the top of the ladder and say, man, why can't I do anything? Because you have all this gear, but then your fingers don't know how to work, your ears don't know how to pick up like tonal differences. Like, it leads to a lot of problems when the gear is what you look at as the thing you need.
Yeah.
So in fact, my custom bass, I purely got it built to just literally accommodate the way I play. I play a lot of fingerstyle. I like to play fast, but despite my love for speed, the string spacing is quite wide. So a lot of people found that a little bizarre, but I told them I'm used to my Squire. I'm used to playing on that thing, that even if I spend X amount of money building a bass, I still like that resistant element.
Right.
So when I told Luther, yeah, can we go for 18.5? Because he was like, hey, but a lot of guys go for 16.5 or 17, like for the way you play. I'm like, yeah, but man, I'm 19 on the jazz bass. I'm used to that. So give me 18.5 with the low B. It'll be just nice. It's exactly just nice. I get a lot of noise when I play now. It's hard to play, actually, a little bit. It's a great, beautiful instrument, but it puts up a fight. So I'm like, great, this is what I wanted. I didn't want something that's going to be a cakewalk. So I generally believe in things being ergonomic, but yeah, learning to work with what you have first and foremost is paramount. It's very important, because if you convince yourself, no, I need that, unless it's really a necessity, like, okay, to keep things fairly quiet in a recording situation and just to have ease of power regulation, I have a power conditioner. That is a necessity. I can't deny that. But anything else that goes below this preamp, it's possibly not a necessity. It's just me wanting things to have, and that's the problem with having extra rack spaces. I'm looking at it, I'm like, I want to get this, I want to get that, but I'm like, I don't need it yet.
Right.
I would eventually need it if I'm looking to produce people within my workspace. But at the moment with COVID and all that, I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to, this is purely for me. So this works perfectly, So I recorded the drums for my album in here, and I had a very good sound happening, and I showed it to a bunch of my friends, and they just wouldn't believe it. And I told them, man, that's because you're convinced you need to walk into a studio, spend $300 an hour to get that sound dialed in. Sure, you can do that. But who has $300 an hour now? Who has that kind of money and liberty? You spend all that money making records and doing stuff, and then you sell it on Spotify for like 5 cents for 10,000 streams or whatever. And then you'll be sitting there thinking, man, where is my ROI? That's why I say everything you look at it, you have to look at it from an ROI perspective. In today's world, it's business. You need to look at it from, okay, I invested X amount of dollars in this. How am I going to make it back? It's not about, yeah, I got this good bass. Now I can play really well, but where does it go from there? So, yeah, that perception is interesting. One guy I remember many years ago asked me on my channel, he's like, do you play Squire because you like it or because you're poor?
Yeah, that's the one I read.
That question, it killed me. I was laughing, I was really laughing because it's a very sincere question, actually.
Yeah.
And then I told him, you know what, at that moment, I was like, it's a bit of both, but definitely more of me liking it. I love it, But yeah, never underestimate some cheap guitars and basses. Like, you'll be surprised. I remember once in Malaysia, I played this, I think they're a Chinese brand, SX. This jazz bass, a fretless jazz bass. Man, I was fighting and haggling with the studio owner to sell it to me. I was ready to put up a fight because it was great. And I told him, man, I'll give you, I know it's worth maybe like, I don't know, $100. I'll give you 300, 400. Like, just give it to me,
Yeah.
But he refused to, because even he knew the value of it. He's like, yeah, this sounds good, looks great. I'm not letting go of it just because it's cheap.
It's your mind really tricks you into stuff. For me, I had a Yamaha RBX 375, which is a very good bass. And at some point, my wrist used to hurt where I was trying to play it. And I convinced my brain convinced me rather that your bass is not good enough. That's why your wrist is hurting. It's actually my technique. I wasn't playing
Mm.
properly. I wasn't doing the right things, and that's why the wrist was hurting. Then recordings also, I had this thing. I must get another bass, and then I got a Sukop bass, the six string I have right now. Very nice bass, very nicely built. Everything is great about it. Spent a lot of money getting it. Got it. Uh, Still sounded like shit because everything was wrong with me, not with the instruments I'm using. Then the mind is saying that, oh, it's a new bass, you're just getting used to it.
Used to it.
That's why you're not sounding good. It's just gonna, like, once you get used to it, you'll be fine. I actually spent a lot of months and years actually just struggling with these weird thoughts. And then of course, I eventually came to the same realization that it's not. And I came to that realization looking at your videos. You literally convinced me into opening my head about, gotta figure your things out on your own, by yourself, by your hands. None of the instruments are going to actually help. And
Hmm.
I actually went to a store once and I played one of the squires. I loved it. My mind was closed to them earlier until I saw you play and how beautiful it sounded. And I have a squire now, and I can easily say it's because of you that I could
Oh,
get it. And
thanks a lot.
same thing,
Thanks a
now I
lot.
use it everywhere. I have a squire, which is like considered really low. Then I take the Sukop also, just to balance
Mm.
things out. Sometimes, there's specific kind of a sound needed, whatever.
Sound right.
But it really works. Anthony, talking about ROI, and it's now the business side of things. It's your
Sorry,
cat.
sorry.
No
Let
problem.
me
I'll
let
wait.
me just let her out. Yeah, sorry.
I was asking that, you just mentioned ROI and this, the business side of things, where musicians mostly are sitting and waiting for things to get correct around them. The environment needs to be supporting the music culture, and gigs need to be happening and being created by somebody else. That's the kind of perspective most of the musicians have. But then there's this side of it where you start thinking of investing into something, getting returns out of it. Like if you buy gear, how do you make that money back? Similarly, I know you started your YouTube channel about 5 years ago. Is it 5 years ago? 6 years ago?
About 4 years ago,
4 years.
2017. Yeah.
Did you have some sort of a strategy that I'm going to build this up and make some revenue of it? In terms of, were you thinking I'm going to invest time? What made you start the channel altogether?
Okay, the primary reason I started the channels was just because of how much of misinformation was there with bass education, you know. So I purely wanted to start something that was dedicated to a harmony, melody, and rhythm based education system for bass players. Started there. In terms of actual returns from it, I really wasn't looking at it. But also at the time, because living in Dubai, I mean, it's nice to be here. It's a nice place to earn. But in terms of arts, especially for music and my kind of music, there's nothing. There's nothing for me here in that regard. So it's very easy to lose your mind in that sense, because you start to question yourself, man, what am I doing here? Or am I good enough to be here or there? You like getting into your head is just another world, basically. So I primarily started posting for the sake of my mental health. I needed an avenue to just let myself go.
Mm.
And then I also had a particular context for it because educational material is misleading. So I thought, okay, let me do this, put the lessons out. So when I started doing that, the channel grew slowly. It's still growing very slowly, but that's, I think, primarily because of the nature of my content. I am refusing to sell out by posting the generic stuff, and I don't care about it because what starts to happen is this. So, of course, the more I do it, the better I get at it, and I'm definitely a better and stronger educator. Sorry, better and stronger educator than I was 4 years ago compared to now. So when you have that kind of a platform, people start to relate to you, and within that group of people, some might relate to you on a more personal level. So I think, but prior to that, through Instagram, I was teaching online too. Some people reached out to me, but that platform is much more on exposing yourself as a player or a producer or whatever. Like, it's got a niche element to it. Whereas I felt like YouTube was a little more general because it's an actual video dedicated platform, right? So through the channel, I started to get lesson inquiries. And believe it or not, for the last 5-6 years, I've been working towards this one goal. I want to reduce how much I rely on gigs to earn my money. Because, not because I have anything against gigs, I enjoy playing a gig. But the reliability is absolutely shit with gigs. You could have a great month playing every night on a nice December month, and then January 1st you're sitting at home, and then next thing you know, it's Feb 14th, you're playing a Valentine's gig. So that unreliability, and even if you are touring with a big artist, I mean, let's look at last year. Look at what's happened. Everyone who's been tied down to one thing or tied down to just this pretty much got screwed. And I empathize, but this is also what happens when you are what I call a delusional dreamer about the music dream. So many years ago, when I started to gig full time, I've been playing gigs since I was little in church, but I would say from 2009 I started actually gigging. Even at that point, I used to think, man, this is nice, but I can't imagine this as a sustainable source of income. To run things and do things. Of course, there are many who are doing this, and people say, yeah, but Nathan East did it. I'm like, man, Nathan East's time when he started was so different.
Yeah.
There's so many things to consider. You need to consider.
Yeah, they could earn from records also that time, no?
Yes, they could earn from records, from royalties. If the guy arranged, he would get a share. Like, there were so many avenues to earn. Now the avenues have narrowed down. And then in the last 10-15 years, you are forced to tour to make your money if all you do is play music. So I started to teach because of very different reasons, and I actually enjoy teaching. I actually love the process. I love seeing people get into it. And because, I even tell them, hey, this is a personal growth thing. I teach them and I'd say, hey, you learn this concept. It's not because I'm trying to get you that Chicoria gig. No, that's not the goal. The goal is for you to be a better musician than you were yesterday. That's it. But yeah, the pure nature of gigs was just astounding when I first moved to Dubai. In my first year here, I arrived summer of 2015. And then come January 2016, until June, I had 2 gigs in 6 months in Dubai. It's insane. And it was not like there were no gigs. There were plenty of gigs. But there is a favoritism game here, So that made me question myself, man, am I not good enough? And it just put me on this downward spiral psychologically. It was very hard to get out of. And then that same year, in July, August, I got a call from the Lincoln Center in Doha. Winton Marcellus had a club curated there, and they called me. They're like, hey, you want to do a 2-month residency? Very nice pay and everything. I took it, So it was like great, because prior to Dubai, I was in Doha for a bit, so I had built a rapport and relationship with those people. But again, they called me because of reliability, and then it made me question something. I'm like, okay, these guys are calling me all the way over there to play a residency with a band from Washington DC. They don't know me, but they're calling me. That must mean I'm a pretty good player at the very least. But why is it not working out here where I'm at? Nobody's calling me locally, So it really started to mess with my head. And then at that point, I consciously made an effort saying, man, I'll do this for now, but I need to have a proper plan B, which should become plan A. And then I looked at teaching as that. So the YouTube channel, as it grew, the number of inquiries for lessons grew. Of course, not all inquiries go through. But it started to get more and more serious. For me, I realized a shift in my ability to make more money in this regard, have more returns after I released my album. Because I think one of the tricky things with being an educator online is that there's so many of them, and most of them are not putting out music.
Yeah.
They don't. Most of them don't write. They teach, yeah. So I teach, and then I put out a solo album. I'm putting out the next one. And I'm not saying, hey, check out song 5. You remember that YouTube lesson here? Yeah, that same concept. No. But if you listen hard enough, you will definitely connect with it. Not just from a music point of view, but from what I've been posting on my channel through the years. you will start to relate and say, okay, this is what this guy has been yapping about when he says scales and arpeggios and stuff like that. So it brings some level of credibility. So now a lot of my students who choose to study with me, they stick around for years, at least 1 or 2 years at the very minimum. And that's a steady form of income, you know. And ironically, that was not the outcome I was hoping for when I started the channel, but that's what it led to.
Right.
And then I gave it the space to just say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'll just take on more teaching and I'll reduce the gigs. I'll never forget the first time I turned down a gig I didn't want to do. Man, the happiness I felt was so gratifying, because I constantly found myself in positions like I do the gig and half into the gig, I'm like, why on earth did I agree to do this? Why? If only I had X amount of money, I could have just said, nah, man, I don't want to do the gig. And then as of 2020, through the course of the pandemic, people were offering me a bunch of gigs, because over here gigs opened up in July last year, but now it's again been banned. So it's like, I started to realize, wow, I have this flexibility that I want to play. Okay, I'll take up a gig or whatever, or set up a gig for myself. But I don't have to bank on it for my rent, to feed, to look after my folks back in Sri Lanka or anything like that. So it's like, I feel so much more secure. And it also enabled me to have a good saving scheme, a plan at least, to see, okay, how can I do things? Like all the stuff I've bought and to make the studio up, this has been in the making for multiple years. But then the minute I allowed teaching to take the forefront priority over gigging, it worked, because teaching took care of the necessities and savings and stuff like that. And whatever gigs I did, it went into the gear, you know? Or vice versa. It allowed me to spread the revenue around. So I think in today's world in particular, being a good player alone and gigging alone it's not sufficient, very realistically put, you know. And it's a harsh reality, but 2020 has made it so evident that live music has been on a decline. Because musicians are posting about how they miss doing live gigs. Have you seen anybody else post, I miss going to a concert? Like, I've seen a few, very few, but I don't see the general public saying, yeah, bring back gigs, man. I miss going out to watch a concert. No, Ganta, like nobody cares, you know. So it's like, that's the current state of it. That doesn't mean nobody literally cares, but got to stop being hopeful and dreamy about these things and try to find other avenues. There's so many other avenues you can produce. I think production is a very good thing to get into. And of course, financially speaking, it has more flexible avenues, because not only can you produce for yourself, you can do jingles and you can do a lot of corporate work that way to make your money. And if you get good at production, like, you can do a bunch of things, you know. You can not only just say, oh, I have to teach to make money instead of playing. If you don't like teaching, it's okay. Don't do it. Do something else. There's so many more things. I know a bunch of musicians who are doing video now. And I know another guy who, he actually has a child with special needs, and he's so good with working with special needs kids. He decided to do that, and he's so happy. Imagine playing music for so many years, and then suddenly he's a special needs teacher. And he said, like, this feels like the gig for him, because it's so much more gratifying. And I'm like, hey, that's a beautiful thing. And that's the interesting part about life, you know. You see so many guys who've been doing music for so long, and then they just quit and they disappear.
Yeah.
It might come back after many years. So this actually takes me back to one quick little story of this one like a saxophone player I met in Malaysia, a Japanese guy, old guy, came to a jam session. I could tell from just looking at him, he's a corporate guy, has a job. Then he starts to play, and I'm just sitting there, I'm like, I immediately knew, okay, this guy at some point had a very killing career of playing the saxophone or something, you know. So I spoke to him, I approached him, and then turns out he's the senior vice president of Hitachi. And he was an aspiring saxophone player. But even then, in the 70s, 80s, he was like, yeah, I didn't think I want to play for a living, because here's his reasoning. And this is also the same thing I spoke with Floyd about so many times. He said, if I had to bank on this to pay my bills, the passion and the enjoyment of it will go on a steady decline. It will. And it's so true. And that started to hit me, it started to make me think. And then for many years I've been thinking about this, and then in 2017 I made a trip to Mumbai, and then seeing Floyd in person, just the sheer joy he has in just lying down on his couch and playing the guitar, I was just like, man, I love that. It's so real, it's so
Yeah.
much heart. And that helped me make up my mind saying, okay, you know what, if you're not gigging entirely for the rest of your career, it's okay, it is just what it is. But at least, hey, guess what, every time you pick up your damn instrument, you're going to enjoy it. And I think at the end of the day, why did we pick music? It's not because of sophistication, or as a 5-year-old you look at the drums and say, yeah, I want to play a song in 1716. No, it's it's just sheer joy and delight. That's what music is, right? That's why we get into it. But where does that go? Where does it disappear when you become an adult and start gigging and making money? So it's like that it was a very hard reality to accept for me, despite being okay at teaching and stuff like that. But I had to be okay with it, because it is what it is. And man, I play 3 instruments and I still wasn't gigging a lot here. It's hilarious, because one would think, oh, this guy plays guitar, can play drums, cool. He must be doing a gig every night. No, if I had 3 gigs a week, that's wow for me. So sometimes it's not even about how good you are as a player. Sometimes it's just about your skin color. Sometimes it's just about how nice you are to people that gets you on the gigging circuit. So it's like there's just so much dirty politics and science and this and racism involved and all these things that I don't want to put myself through this. And for sure, I don't want to see younger musicians, talented ones, going through this, because the psychological warfare of that it's insane. And if you're not strong enough in the head, it will punch you down easily.
Yeah, it does make you stronger. I mean, you have to find your way, navigate through it. And, as I'm growing a little older and learning my set of lessons, also realize that musicians make a very big deal about being a full-time musician, that how hard it is, and, we are doing such a difficult thing. Now, the example you just said, that the senior president of Hitachi is a sax player and he does this. And recently I met somebody who is a pianist, a cellist, and a master's in finances. And she's the programming person at NCP in Mumbai. So people are doing all this stuff together. And it's sometimes I just feel that music has been played, showcased in a manner that's something really, really difficult, and you'll not be able to find your way around it if you don't just do music. So I find that weird now. Also, Dhruv Ghanekar, he was on the podcast and he was mentioning that it's fine for your decisions to evolve over a period of time, because when you decided to be a guitar player or a drummer, you were 16. And if you just think that that's what it is after this for the rest of your life, and you can't do anything else apart from this, I mean, it's so refreshing to hear about your friends getting into video, somebody's taking care of children, and it's just wonderful for people to step into those avenues. And if they find purpose there, there's just nothing like it. Anthony, man, we've crossed about an hour. I just want to hear from you. Anybody who's just started learning bass, any suggestions for them? Any books they can read, be it self-help or anything related to music? Anything you want to suggest them?
Well, if you're just picking up the bass, hopefully a Squire. No, I'm just kidding. You know what? Just enjoy the process and do what you enjoy. Do what you dig and vibe with. If that is playing a straight edge rock song or playing something complex, just try it. Just bury your head in it, As much as you might sound good or bad, don't care, just do it. Just enjoy the process. And then eventually, once things start to make sense and align itself, you can grab a book in said context or something. But for starters, keep it simple. Just take a song that you like, try to learn it, play it, enjoy yourself, call your friends over for beer, let them watch you, maybe tip you, So I think, don't take out the joy of it. Keep it in there as much as possible. Yeah.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much. And
No
I
worries,
have
man.
a lot of love and respect towards you. And it's just
Thank you.
growing. And after talking to you today for the first time ever, it's just increased even more. So keep
I'm
doing
glad,
whatever
man.
you're
Thanks.
doing,
Thanks for
man.
having me.
It's really a huge contributor to all of us, all bass players, all musicians. Thanks a ton.
My pleasure, man. Take care.
Bye. Thanks a ton, man.